Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now today we're going to be talking about quantum computing because if you've seen anything on Twitter like I have, that's basically the only thing anybody wants to talk about right now is quantum computing going to kill Bitcoin? Is crypto dead because of quantum computing? This, that, and whatever else. And so anyway, I've done a little bit of research on this. I found some really great different sources that I do think are really going to help explain this quite well. So we're going to go in, get started with that. But before, just want to do a super quick overview of the crypto market. We are seeing another day where we are pulling back. Hyperliquid's still moving pretty well. Hyperliquid's been doing really well over the past several weeks. Helium, also another one that's been moving particularly well. Helium is one that I think is going to actually do really quite well this cycle, just because it's a DePIN project. It's actually really starting to gain some like real world traction. It's pretty much got everything that, in my opinion, I think it needs to really start to catch on and do pretty well. And so Helium's one that I'm keeping a very close eye on. But overall, I did want to go and start taking an overview of the topic of today's video, which is quantum computing going to kill Bitcoin? Now, for those of you who may not be super familiar with this situation, I'll provide just a super brief overview of basically what's going on. I found two people who have posted some pretty comprehensive threads on Twitter that, in my opinion, do a pretty great job of covering these. So I'm going to use these as kind of a basis for explaining what we've got here. And then if you have any other like further questions, you could probably just go and read these threads in a little bit more detail. I'll actually like and repost both of these just so it's easy to find them. You can just find my Twitter profile and the link in the description, and you can go there and check those out if you are interested. Now, what we are seeing here is so basically what happened is Google essentially dropped some news, I'd say close to a week ago at this point, that they have actually created this new quantum computing chip that solved a calculation in 5 minutes that would take the most powerful supercomputer 10 to the 25 degree years. So if we look, the age of the universe is this number, 13.8 billion, and the time that it would take to solve this transaction is this long, right? I mean, extreme amount of time. Time for Willow, 5 minutes. So obviously we can see like several orders of magnitude of degrees of improvement here, which is absolutely insane. Now, obviously, the first thing when you see something like this is like, oh my gosh, this is crazy, right? And so there's two things that I wanted to look at here. This first technical article is going to be kind of more of high level with a scope on crypto specifically. The second level is actually going to be a far more technically advanced article that is explaining kind of the math behind how this computer essentially solved this transaction in such a quick amount of time, why it's not exactly what people are kind of making it out to be, and why so far at least this doesn't have a super relevant like current impact on crypto. So we're going to take a look at all of that, but for right now we'll start with this one. What we can see, obviously everybody's like, panicking and maybe it's going to kill Bitcoin, all this type of stuff. I mean, we've heard Bitcoin is dead several times before, so I don't know that this is particularly new news for anybody who's been in crypto for a while. But one thing we also need to remember too is if we just take a super quick look at price, we can see that Bitcoin is still holding over $100,000, has basically held pretty steady since we've seen this article come out. And so if this really was going to be like a catastrophic event for Bitcoin and people knew this, we would have seen like some mass sell-off event, right? I mean, Bitcoin would probably be down 50% this week if this was truly like an imminent threat to Bitcoin. So again, just keep in mind that like we have all sorts of people in this market, right? From super retail to people on the bleeding edge of ZK and quantum computing and cryptography and all this type of stuff. And so they're also invested in the market too. And so if they thought this was an existential threat to crypto, they would be selling, right? We have not really seen much of that going on here, which is why I think it's a little bit overblown. We're going to continue looking into that. Before we did, if you are interested in finding a place to trade, I am still working with BTCC. They are offering still that 10% bonus on first time deposits. Really awesome deal. Like if you're looking for a new place to trade anyway, you might as well get a 10% bonus on your money if you ask me. This is in addition to the extra bonuses of up to $10,055 per user. Also, they've been around for 13 years, which is probably longer than most of us have been in crypto. And also they have 300 plus crypto futures as well as up to 500x leverage. Again, I do not at all recommend 500x leverage. I personally don't even use 500x just because I think nothing really good comes from that. But if that's something that you're wanting to try, I guess obviously not financial advice, you have to make your own decisions, but just letting you know that that's not something that I do at all. Also, no VPN or KYC necessary. So going back to this article, we can see, obviously, if this was an existential threat to Bitcoin, it would already be crashing, right? But what we can see is we got some of the technical like specifications. In Google's new chip, it's a 105 qubit processor. Basically, it's got really strong error correction, stability, and it solves basically one specific problem. And this is what we're going to get into the next article that we're going to be looking at, so more on that later. Impressive, obviously, of course, is that the Bitcoin killer? Probably not, because essentially there's been a lot of cryptography experts who've been looking into this a little bit further, and they're estimating on the low end, I've seen anywhere as high as multiple billion qubits, but on the low end we've seen 13 million qubits essentially could theoretically break encryption and reverse engineer private keys, access any wallets, move funds, all that type of stuff. So theoretically, this is a problem that could happen in the future, but as I've kind of covered at a fairly high level on some past videos that I've made, we have to remember that the Bitcoin has been flexible, right? And it's been upgrading over time. What we can see here is exactly that. Willow has 105 qubits. 13 million are needed to break Bitcoin. Basically, we need a 23,800x to essentially reach that improvement. We're going to be probably years-ish away from that, in my opinion, unless we see some other quantum leap here within the next couple weeks or so. I would imagine, we're years away from something like that happening. And what we can see is Satoshi actually saw this coming 13 years ago. And so in a 2010 forum post, he essentially addressed this. SHA-256 is very strong. It can last for decades unless there's a major breakthrough attack. So if there is a breakthrough attack, obviously something like quantum computing, then obviously, there's a need to change. But what we can see is there's a contingency plan for doing this. And Bitcoin in the past has a proven track record of evolving. We can see in 2017, they did SegWit, which involved scaling plus killed transaction malleability. In 2018, they involved the Lightning Network, which essentially enabled instant transactions. In 2021, Taproot brought in enhanced privacy as well as smart contracts, and each upgrade essentially made Bitcoin stronger. So quantum resistance plans, there's already a whole bunch in motion. We could see Sphinx signature implementation, lattice-based cryptography, hash-based signatures, zero-knowledge proof layers, multi-layered validation systems, quantum resistance address formats, time-lock security features, emergency migration protocols, all this type of stuff. Like, this is already going on, and this is what I've said before within the Bitcoin ecosystem. It's always doing things and always evolving to essentially continue increasing the strength of the Bitcoin network. And same type of thing with using a quantum computer, because one of the other things that people mention is, oh, well, a quantum computer, if it's this powerful, could just go mine all the rest of the Bitcoin like tomorrow. No, because there's a difficulty adjustment within the Bitcoin algorithm, right? And so I think it's every 2016 blocks, I think. There's a difficulty adjustment that is supposed to happen about every 2 weeks, and then it either adjusts the transaction or the hashing difficulty up or down depending on what the power in the network is. If something like a quantum computing chip were to come into play, obviously they'd blow through those up to potentially 2016 blocks, but then after that the difficulty adjustment is going to get, again, orders of magnitude more difficult, and again, it's going to bring it back to that kind of 10-minute block time that is supposed to be expected. This has all been kind of designed innately within the Bitcoin ecosystem, so this is something that we can feel relatively comfortable about. Also, there's a whole bunch of other stuff we talk about, new locks, essentially like quantum proof locks, make keys impossible to copy, multiple layers of security, strengthens entry point, all this type of stuff to basically continue upgrading Bitcoin and keep it ahead of anybody that could break this. Now, in my opinion, the only thing that really poses kind of an existential threat to Bitcoin is something like a Willow type of project taking place, but on a scale much, much, much larger. And to do something that type of scale without anybody figuring it out, I think would be almost impossible to do. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing here as far as what we're going on. He continues on to say a little bit more stuff, but basically it's TLDR, Bitcoin is safer on the Bitcoin network than it is in your bank account, because you also have to remember one really, really key thing. If quantum computing reaches 13 million qubits, are they going to be working on attacking the SHA-256 algorithm, or are they just going to hack Chase or JP Morgan or Bank of America or whoever, Merrill Lynch, and just drain all their money, right? Or hack the Federal Reserve and add a couple extra zeros to their bank account or what, right? There's so many other things that they could do with this type of quantum computing power rather than crack the Bitcoin network. So that's kind of my opinion there from kind of an overall high level Bitcoin level ecosystem type stuff. Now, looking at specifically what was going on with this quantum computing, I want to go over this article from Jeffrey Scholes, because in my opinion, this I've read a lot trying to figure out the best way to present this and going into what is actually the true threat here. This is probably the best article that I've seen. Really, really, really impressive article. So we're going to go through this. Again, if you have any like questions or want to read it on your own pace or try and, spend some more time understanding it or want to follow Jeffrey, any of that type of stuff, like I said, I'll have the link to my Twitter in the description below, and I will like and repost this just so you can see it and you've got that if that's something that you're looking to follow up on. So basically, he went through, read the like quantum computing paper about what specifically happened with this whole Willow thing that led to this announcement. And don't get me wrong, like this is a pretty impressive announcement, right? I mean, something that would have taken 10 to the 25 degree years done in less than 5 minutes. Really, really impressive. So first off, essentially a classic computer keeps information in 64-bit groups called words, right? Ones and zeros, essentially. Each of these groups are bits that are run through logic gates, such as and, or, and not. These gates take 1 or 2 bits as an input and return a single bit as an output. And returns 1 if both the inputs are 1, or returns 1 if at least one of the inputs are 1, and not returns 1 if the input is 0. So quantum computer, instead of using bits, uses a qubit, and a qubit is a 2-dimensional vector of real numbers. This means one bit can hold infinitely more information than a single regular bit. A bit can hold 0 or 1, but a qubit can hold a 2D vector of real numbers, so it is much more expressive. Now this is where things start to get a little bit convoluted or difficult. This is going, I would say, into like some pretty advanced like math, so try and stick with it. What we will get into is some examples a little bit further down along if you're kind of getting lost in this. So you can think of an individual qubit as like a probability distribution. Think of it as like like drawing a trend line through like a whole bunch of like dots on a graph, right? It averages around certain values, but does not have a concrete value because obviously it changes. It's based on probability. This is kind of where quantum computing gets into it, because when you get into like the quantum level, particularly within physics, chemistry, that type of stuff, you never really like, particularly if you think about like atoms. Well, electrons, we used to think about like those circles moving around like the proton and neutron, like the nucleus part, right? Well, that's not how that works mathematically anymore, right? What they have is they've drawn like this, essentially like this probability distribution of like this cloud of where it most likely is at any point in time. Because essentially TLDR is like, if you shoot an electron at something to figure out where it is, you've essentially knocked it off where it was going. Because you can essentially really never know where it is other than at that exact point in time when you found out where it is, because after you've hit it, it's you've thrown it off its course and it's somewhere else. So that's why with quantum computing, you have this probability distribution of where things most likely are. And so that's exactly what we're doing here. And that's why we have these vectors that essentially create probabilistic values of what is in this particular qubit. So, however, when the qubit is observed, it's forced into a vector representation of either 1 or 0, representing a binary 0, or 0, 1, representing a binary 1. We call the transformation from a probability distribution to a concrete binary value, collapsing the qubit. So essentially what you're doing is you're taking the like what it probably is and then just forcing it into one number. So it could be either based on any given point in time, but you're forcing it to essentially roll up into something that is a binary value at this point in time. So for example, a non-collapsed qubit might look like 0.83, 0.54, on and on. A quantum gate is effectively matrix multiplication. If you multiply a qubit, 2-dimensional vector, by a 2x2 matrix, you get another qubit, a 2-bit vector, back. For example, a quantum NOT gate looks like the 2x2 matrix below. If that is multiplied by a qubit, 1, 0, then the qubit is flipped to 0, 1. This still works as expected for non-collapsed qubits. Like a regular computer, a quantum computer keeps bits in groups. So a 64-bit quantum computer would have a vector of 64 2D vectors serving as its word. Here's where the speed up happens. In a regular computer, each of the 64 bits don't know anything about the value of any of the other 64 bits. If we want one bit to affect the other bit, we have to explicitly combine them with a logic gate. However, in a quantum computer, each of the 64 qubits can talk to each other via the quantum entanglement. Again, this is something that is like a little bit more of like a physics type of in-depth type of thing, so we won't go too much into it. But essentially, think about like they have some level of knowledge of what the others are doing. Running a quantum circuit means you plug in a quantum vector, run it through a bunch of matrix multiplications, and then collapse the output. The final vector will be the correct answer. Technically, the quantum computers can give wrong answers, but if you run the computation multiple times, then you will get the correct answer on average. Now, this is the like true crux of quantum computing, and this is where we start to get into some of the dynamics as to why getting to like 13 million qubits or something will be difficult, because obviously when you're essentially like estimating things and you're kind of extrapolations can be wrong, but when you do it in a limited enough capacity, everything is like close enough that you can see where it's actually going to a relatively somewhat accurate degree of output, where the more you get, the more varied answers you're going to get. So the harder it is to kind of like extrapolate a line. Think about this like on a graph, right? So if you have 4 like points that you have to put on a graph, and all 4 of these people know each other somewhat directly, the odds that they're going to form up in a somewhat coherent line is pretty high, right? But now let's say we get to 60 people, and now all these 60 people have to talk to each other and get within this like somewhat similar line. It's going to be straight-ish, but it's not going to be as accurate as like if 4 people were trying to get into a line, right? Well, now let's involve 100,000 people. Well, trying to get 100,000 people organized and essentially sitting in somewhat of a straight line, while you may be able to essentially like draw a trend line through the 100,000 people, the variation of where people are going to be and where things are, this is all going to get much more varied. And so essentially it makes the accuracy of your line a little bit less fuzzy than what you would get like with 4 people, for example. This is kind of like the crux of quantum computing. And so basically, to get back into like more of the technical description, quantum computing is matrix multiplication of real numbers on crack. So the current problem with quantum computing is that as the circuit gets bigger, they become less correct on average, because all of them talking to each other creates so much noise the system stops working. Once your probability of being correct drops below a certain threshold, your quantum computer becomes useless, because again, there's so many people talking to each other that it's very, very hard to separate the signal from the noise. This is a major blocker for current quantum compute. So here we're going to look at a specific example that I think is going to, make some of this a little bit more maybe digestible, because we're moving away from the math heavy side and into like a real practical application. So essentially, suppose you shine a laser beam into an ice cube. So like actually simulating what the laser will do when it exits the ice cube is very, very hard to predict, because of the quantum phenomena is involved. You have all of the essentially like the molecules of water, you've got the molecules of water at varying states, all of this different type of stuff. So to actually compute what the laser will do, you have to explicitly compute quantum entanglement, which is slow for classical computers, but essentially like built into a quantum computer, because that's essentially how they're built from the ground up. So however, you can't estimate the distribution of how the laser will scatter without a quantum computer, so you can have at least a rough idea of if your ideas or your answer is correct or not. Now, theoretically, a quantum computer can predict what the laser will do when it enters and exits the ice cube, assuming it knows the distribution of particle structures of the ice cube. You could model the laser traveling through the ice as a lot of matrix multiplications. It would effectively be multiplication by a lot of seemingly random matrices with some entanglement involved. By analogy, this is essentially what Google was doing. The computation Google was doing was a pseudo-random quantum circuit. Think about like an ice cube type of thing. But we know a quantum circuit is just matrix multiplications on a crack. Therefore, it is a bunch of random matrix multiplications with an output that looks right. Google's actual breakthrough was that the output of the circuit looks correct. And compared to the headlines, it is for sure, right? But the academic breakthrough is that essentially they were able to get more people talking to each other and notice an apparent increase in accuracy when modeling how a laser shines through an ice cube. Now, this is the noteworthy part, right? Because like I said before, somewhat easy to get 4 people to talk to each other and stand into a straight line. But the larger you get, the harder it is for you to get these people to stand in a straight line. And if we were to make this example even more apt, it'd probably be like, you have to get this amount of people to stand in a straight line within, let's say, 30 seconds, right? Getting 4 people to stand in a straight line within 30 seconds, super easy. 60 people, possible, but definitely harder. You're definitely going to be taking much more of the 30 seconds. 100,000 people, getting 100,000 people to stand in a straight line in 30 seconds, virtually an impossible task, right? I'm not even sure that you could draw a line through the crowd in a way that's like probabilistic, to a high degree of correlation. That is exactly what is going on with quantum computing, and that is why this is essentially such a noteworthy breakthrough, is because they're able to increase the amount of people that they have talking to each other and coming to a somewhat reasonably accurate calculation. This, in my opinion, is this is the innovation here. So you can definitely tell if a computation has failed, but it seemed to be failing less as the circuit got bigger, which is really the important part. Normally, a quantum computer simulating a laser going through an ice cube would produce a garbled mess because quantum computers lose too much accuracy as the circuit gets bigger, and the output no longer collapses to the right answer on average. But that was not the case in the Google experiment. However, note that the problem is rigged in favor of quantum computers because of the quantum entanglement. So the benchmark is explicitly modeling a quantum phenomenon, so of course we get a speed up. In other words, Google created a random distribution on the output that seemed correct. Well, why does it seem correct? Because by design, the computation cannot really run on a classical computer. But if we can't run it on a classical computer, how do we know that the quantum computer is actually giving the right answer? The answer is we don't really know for sure, and this is the problem. And we essentially, it's one of those like, if it looks right, it's probably right, but we don't actually know, like at a quantum level, if what it's doing is truly correct. This is kind of the catch-22 here, is it looks like it was correct, but is it actually correct? Well, we don't have explicit understanding of like the inner workings of quantum phenomena, so we don't know for sure. Now, the next question, and this is where we get back to crypto, is, well, how big a step is this towards quantum computers breaking cryptography? Well, so what Google did is create a circuit with 9 gates, 25 gates, and 49 gates, and notice that the accuracy of the output seemed to improve, or rather the computation failed less. Therefore, by extrapolation, something with a lot more gates should have more accuracy, right? Well, no, skeptics would be right to point out that the extrapolation from 49 to 49,000 is a very big leap. And obviously, quantum computing is essentially at the stage right now where some smart teenager wired a few logic gates together in random fashion and said, hey, look, my circuit made a random output and it didn't explode. Compared to previous attempts, it's an improvement, but it's a long way from training an LLM. Going from random circuits to ones that need to do something useful, especially ones that require orders of magnitude more gates, is a whole different problem. The problem at hand is to explicitly model quantum phenomena, so it should be no surprise that a quantum computer could do it better. And this is where we get to the point where, it's essentially an exercise in technical marketing. Write about something seemingly powerful tech that creates fear, AI, nuclear, quantum, whatever, fear creates engagement. Do a PR campaign where journalists write clickbaity headlines on a subject that they are incapable of explaining, let alone understanding, and then try to enhance your brand by showing that you are achieving some success on a hard problem. Now, Jeffrey's point is that he thinks Google needed to do this because they're losing on the AI narrative, which I think is probably fair, so they have a strong incentive to do a coordinated PR stunt. And also, I mean, under 5 minutes to like 10 to the 25 degree years, like obviously that's an eye-popping number. So obviously it creates a lot of engagement. People are talking about it. There's been a whole bunch of people who've like basically only been talking about it within crypto. But I think this hopefully gave you a pretty good explanation of why quantum computing isn't necessarily like some existential threat that we're going to see tomorrow within crypto. And also, like, based on what we saw in the first article, I completely agree. Like, I think Bitcoin is going to be able to stay ahead of the curve fast enough, because Bitcoin's always changing, right? People think that Bitcoin is some like boomer chain that's not done anything since it came out in 2009, and that's just not true. And so this is one thing that I think is really important to see, is like, unless we see some just completely blindsiding event that happens, Bitcoin will always be able to react quick enough that they'll be able to stay ahead of any potential like attack vectors like quantum computing or something similar. So anyway, like I said, hopefully you found the information in this video useful. If you did, please do give me a like and subscribe. Also, sharing it around would be super helpful, just because I know there's a lot of people talking about this, and I think a lot of people who are trying to look for hopefully a somewhat well-explained answer. And so if you do think that I did this, like I said, like, subscribe, share, all that type of stuff. It really, really does help me out. Also, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, anything like that, please feel free to drop those in the comment section below, because I do try to read and respond to all of those. So if you have anything you want me to see, that'd be a great way to do so. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.